Carlos Sainz is facing a very difficult period ahead of him, and while a driver of his caliber should have zero problems finding a seat in 2025 with a lot of teams at play, he could be making the decision that could be the jackpot or the mistake of his life. So, with teams like Mercedes, Audi and Aston Martin at play, with Red Bull not completely out of the picture, where will we see the smooth operator in 2025? Obviously, Carlos Sainz has been caught in a whirlwind of drama that he would have preferred to avoid, but when the opportunity of signing Hamilton for a team like Ferrari comes along, I guess there's nothing much you can do but cut some ends, and in this case, that end was Sainz. Be that as it may, the Spaniard will have plenty of opportunity to prove to the Maranello team that he was not the problem in the team and that it was all coming from another nature, the human factor involved. And one of the best opportunities he'll have to prove this is Mercedes. The most logical solution for Sainz and perhaps Mercedes is to sign a contract from 2025 onwards, as it would be a simple swap of the drivers. That's all. But the shoes that Sainz has to fill in the Brackley-based squad are far more difficult and heavier than the ones Hamilton will have to fill in the Maranello team. This might prompt the only, and probably the biggest issue when it comes to this collaboration happening in the first place. The biggest pro is that Mercedes will avoid a lot of unnecessary drama. There won't be any silly seasons to manage, and quite frankly, Sainz does fit the character of a driver who is experienced and yet still young to reach his prime and to fight for championships with the right car. However, he has some tough competition in the name of Fernando Alonso, his compatriot, and if you were to put both of their drivers' profiles on a scale, you wouldn't have that big of an issue to see which one would weigh more. 2 championships and 32 wins are definitely a lot more than 0 championships and 2 race wins. But then again, Alonso would come with its own requirements, and while Mercedes could benefit a lot from the 2-time world champion in terms of development and experience, it could very well disturb the relationship between the drivers, as he won't settle for anything less than a championship, while that same goal is going to be the primary motivation for Russell as well. Then again, Sainz is not going to be the designated number 2 driver in Mercedes after all, but at least the team would have the opportunity to let both of the drivers fight it out on track and see who has the better chance of being the next champion with Mercedes. The Silver Arrows, however, might think twice before they sign Sainz, because even though he is this experienced driver we're talking about, he's been cast away from Ferrari, and the Maranello team do not have any trust in him to win a championship in the future, even before Hamilton's arrival. If the team is on the right track, as Hamilton and Loic Serra's moves suggest, then casting out a driver is definitely pointing towards the scenario that the team does not have enough confidence that at a certain point it will be Sainz who will be the next champion in the team. The question is, why should Mercedes trust otherwise for their team? If the Mercedes deal falls through, there are always other teams who are waiting for him, such as Audi. The Spaniard has very close relationships due to his father racing in the Rally Dakar Championship, and it was always known that he's lobbying for his son to join the newbies from 2026 onwards. Audi does mean serious business by entering the team with their own engine and a massive financial support from the VW group, one of which they belong to. And they're looking for a solid driver who could pave the way for their championship winning days, ones they're expecting to come 2 to 3 years after their original entrance in 2026. This, however, would require Sainz to drive 1 full year in Sauber in 2025, and while that wouldn't be too big of an issue for the Swiss team, it would definitely be a massive one for the Spaniard. The expectations that Sauber will be in the midfield are far-fetched ones to say the least, and with a car that had 0 to no competitiveness on the majority of the weekends in 2023, Sainz will find it extremely hard to accommodate after fighting at the top with Ferrari. True, it will be for 1 season only, 2025, but then again, the guarantee that Audi will be fighting up front is not there in 2026, so maybe he'll be signing a deal which would put him in a backmarker car for a couple of years before the team transits into something much more fruitful for him. Therefore, being the number 1 driver in a team like Sauber and Audi might not be the best choice that Sainz has, even though it's very likely to be the one he'll be pushing towards to, because another thing he wants to avoid in his career is to drive a car that he's not too keen towards, similar to what happened in Ferrari. Sainz has constantly called out the team for not building the car in a certain way they should have, and that all prompted a lot of talks as to whether or not the Maranello team is preferring one driver over the other, even though they were more than adamant that this is not the case and that they have 2 equal number 1 drivers on the grid. Be that as it may, Sainz will have yet another option he could be looking into, and that is Aston Martin. Although it's a bit inconvenient, the fact that Hamilton moved to Ferrari means that everything is on the table now, and nothing should surprise us anymore. After all, there will be a vacant seat if Alonso decides to take one of Sainz's available seats in Mercedes. That is, if the Brackley-based squad agrees to a deal too, as the initial report stated that the camp of the Spaniard and Mercedes have had multi-hour talks throughout the previous week in what could be the next big bombshell for the 2025 season. Alonso has already stated his doubts about the 2024's competitiveness of Aston Martin. More precisely, he didn't like what he saw in the simulator when it came to the steering of the car. Although this is just a small issue, we mustn't forget who we're talking about, the man who caused the biggest bombshell move in 2022 by moving from Alpine to Aston Martin. So if he finds a suitable place for his talents elsewhere from 2025 onwards, then that is definitely what he'll be moving towards. Similar to Hamilton, Alonso doesn't have that much time left in the sport, and waiting out for his team to sort out the issues is not written in the stars for him. Therefore, it would be only logical for him to join a more competitive squad and maybe, just maybe, prove that it was not the team's fault that they were not competitive. Although to be fair, building two different cars, and both of them being quite bad, is not something you could write off to the drivers, especially the one like Hamilton, who has been nothing but critical in that period. And if Alonso opens up the spot in Aston Martin for Sainz, it would be quite difficult to look at this as a bad opportunity for the younger Spaniard. Aston Martin is quite competitive. At certain times, they would have even beaten Sainz in Ferrari, and if his feedback is proper, then the finances and the resources are definitely there to make a competitive car and fight for podiums much more frequently than originally anticipated. Plus, even though Lance is the son of the owner of the team, Lawrence, Sainz will have zero to no competition in trying to establish a dominant position in the team, as it's already known why Lance is still keeping that seat in the sport alive. And last but not least, the Red Bull seat could be a very decent option for Sainz as well, even though he would automatically sign the role of the second driver in the team. Not to throw any shade on his name, but beating Verstappen in a Red Bull is something that not even world champions could do at this point, let alone Sainz. But on the positive, he'll have a lot of competitiveness on his hands, and he'll be driving the best car on the grid, which would inevitably turn to multiple race finishes and many podiums to his name. Therefore, being the number 2 driver on the best team on the grid might not sound like the worst case scenario for Sainz after all. With all these options in his hands, where do you think Sainz will end from the 2025 season on? Let us know in the comments down below.